Audrey Joe-Ezigbo is joining me from Canada, the President Nigerian Gas Association. Welcome to you, ma'am. A very good early morning in Canada, because I know you just had to wake up.
Deputy Managing Director of Falcon Corporation.
Can you hear me, ma'am?
I can hear you now, Nancy. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for joining me this early from Canada. I know you should be sleeping by now, because like you guys are 5 hours behind us or so.
Yes, it doesn't work that way. We're always up early anyway.
All right, welcome to the program. Let's get started. Just before I came into the studio, I saw a press release. Will I say yes? A press release from the discos. According to Vanguard newspaper, I must say, a statement that the 11 discos have said they will align with the bill before the House of Reps proposing free electricity supply to all Nigerians for 2 months to mitigate the harsh effect of the coronavirus on power consumers. So the discos operating under the aegis of Association of Nigerian Electricity Distributors promise to abide by all measures taken by the federal government and the National Assembly to the hardship occasioned by the dreaded disease on the country. Okay, this is coming in. I saw this from Vanguard just before I came in. I tried to call the disco spokesperson. I couldn't get him just to confirm also the story before I came in. But let me come to you. We've seen at least the federal government has approved about 200 billion naira for power sector to boost the supply of gas to electricity generation companies. Please confirm to me, please, because, you know, we've been hearing a lot of things, you know. So what exactly is it?
Okay, thanks, Nancy. So the thing is that I believe there are too many things that are happening at the same time. That's really what the challenge is. Yes, some money has been released, but you remember we're talking about the power sector, and there are issues about legacy debts in the first place. So we have some of the gas supply companies that have not been paid as far back as April last year. Then some of them who have received payments maybe about November, December last year. So that money was actually addressing legacy debts. The conversation about the 2 months free power is still on the table currently. So that's what the issue is, that it is dealing with some legacy debts in the first place.
Oh, so it's just legacy debts. What do you mean by legacy debt? That's debts that were owed you before. Let's break it down so that our people can understand. Now, owed credits.
Right. Now, the power sector has been grappling with these huge illiquidity issues. There were some debts that were not paid 2015 into 2016. Now, the last payment assurance guarantee, 701 billion, that was instituted by the government, covered the period of 2017 into December 2018. And of course, we know there's this other 600 billion that was also provisioned. Now, that payment did not capture the pre-2017 debts, one. And then even the implementation of the 701 had its own issues, so that people were not getting full value for the invoices. Beyond that, now that assurance guarantee, that payment expired, and currently people's invoices are not being paid. So that's what the challenge is. It's about stimulating liquidity and trying to allow the value chain to still work. You know that there are challenges from the disco side about collection, and then that backs up all the way down to the GenCos, back up to the gas supply companies. That's what the challenge is in terms of legacy debts. Now, there were some arrangements agreed on whereby there was supposed to be some portion of the payments that would come out of the collections from the discos and another portion that would come out of the government palliatives. What has happened in recent times has been that it is really more the collections from the discos that has been shared along the value chain and not so much from the government side, so that people are getting 25, maybe 35% of invoice values. So the money that has been paid applies to that past debt, and it's not about this current endeavor to get 2 months free electricity across to Nigerians.
So where are we getting all those things mixed up? And Nigerians are expecting that electricity should be a palliative at this time that we're all on a lockdown. If you take a look at Ghana, for example, our closest neighbor, Ghana, the president just, I think before the lockdown or so, announced free electricity for certain categories of consumers. Those that consume, I think, 0 to 50 kilowatts a month, free electricity for them for the next 3 months, I think April, May, and June. And also 50% of electricity bills for consumers in residential areas and those that are engaged in commercial activities, using their March 2020 bill as a benchmark. In Ghana, also free water for them. They've even gone beyond electricity. So the issue of electricity being a palliative in Nigeria, why is our own different right now? And it's topsy-turvy, no, it is not, yes, it is. What exactly is it?
Okay, thanks, Nancy. Very interesting question. You see, we want to be careful every time we start to do comparatives and ask ourselves, are we really looking at apples and apples? Every time the Ghana issue comes up, my response is this. Ghana is a country with a little less than 30 million people, barely 15% of Nigeria's population. Ghana is a country where over 79% of the population have access to electricity. Ghana is a country that occupies less than 240 square kilometers as compared to Nigeria's 900 and something. So just when you weigh that, you know we're not discussing the same thing. Secondly, if you remember, coming out of the challenge that Ghana had with rationing electricity from about 2014 into 2016, remember they had made some moves and licensed some IPPs, signed some different types of contracts, in fact, ultimately getting themselves into a situation where they have excess power. And that's the problem they have now. They have about, I think, 2,700 megawatts is their offtake capacity, whereas they are generating about 5,000. So Ghana is dealing with excess power. And that's another problem for the government in itself. But we're not talking about the same thing. This is Nigeria, larger landmass, much greater population, and the infrastructure is a challenge. If we look across the north, for instance, you see that we have a huge problem in terms of distribution of electricity. So it's not a like-for-like comparative. If the government of Ghana is given free power, do they have the same kind of constraints that we have in Nigeria? We are talking in Nigeria of barely 4,000 megawatts. And this is power that is usually channeled to the industrial and commercial sector so that we can keep the economy going. At this point in time, when we're discussing the palliatives, we also have to ask ourselves, is it sustainable? I believe that the last estimation between NBERT and NERC, I think is from somewhere, this is going to cost Nigeria maybe about 100 and something billion if we do it for 2 months. And there is nothing that says that this pandemic will be over in 2 months, unfortunately. So is this sustainable? Now, in the face also of the decimation of our revenues, given what is happening with the global oil prices and, of course, the impact in Nigeria on our own revenues, is this sustainable? Is this the best thing to do? Now, of course, we understand people are home, and the objective is a laudable one. You want people to be comfortable in their homes. But when you take the landscape of power in Nigeria, we really have to ask ourselves, is this what we should be doing with the limited resources that we have? Or is there some other way we can channel this money into productive activity or into some other...
Okay, let me butt in here, ma'am. You said, of course, we should compare apples and apples. So perhaps in the case of Nigeria and Ghana, it's apples and oranges. And I don't know which is apple now, which is oranges, as it were. But is it not almost the same dynamic? Is there no commonality of dynamics there? Talking about the electricity market, and let's get it straight. The other angle is, can't the government at this time provide free electricity to some people, the poorest of the poor, the vulnerable at this time, just like they're doing in Ghana, you know, and 50% of electricity bills to, just like I said earlier, to some, to residentials and for commercial activities. So can't the government also provide free electricity, perhaps somewhat for 2 months or 3 months or whatever they come to at this time?
Right. So at this time, I agree, Nancy. So certainly there are commonalities, but again, there are many differences even in the landscape. Okay, and I'm sure we don't have enough time to go into the details of that. But let me then focus on the question of, can the government not do this? Certainly they can. And if you have listened to the statements that have been made from ANED, from the GENCOs, the gas suppliers, the NNPC, everybody is saying the same thing. I think we miss those qualifying statements that are being made, and that is if it is paid for, because the money has to flow across the value chain.
So if it
and
is
that's
paid
why
for, it's not free anymore. It's coming at a cost.
It's actually not free, and you just hit the nail on the head that this is exactly the point. As long as the money is guaranteed and it is paid, all right, the challenge is not, the difference between when you are dealing with government, unfortunately, I must say, you have a long lead time between your revenue recognition and your receipts. Now, we're already talking about a value chain that is highly illiquid. And the greatest debtor in this, unfortunately, also tends to be the government. So the question now becomes, when we're talking about palliatives for the Nigerian people, are we also recognizing that the discos, the gencos, the gascos also need to survive? They need this liquidity to be able to sustain this initiative. So if they can make the money available, then that's fine, but it must be available to deal with the entire value chain.
The question now is electricity a social commodity? Or should it be a social commodity? Because here in Nigeria, we do feel, especially from our history, from I think NEPA, or is it ECN those days, electricity, ECN or so, to NEPA, to PHCN, to discos now, a lot of Nigerians expect electricity to be a social commodity.
Yes, that is a narrative we have lived with for so long. That is a narrative that could have worked if we had done the right things, maybe from the NEPA days. If the infrastructure had been deployed across country, it had been sustained, maintained, and so on and so forth. But that is not the case currently. At this point in time, like I pointed out earlier, we have barely, I think in the country, 12,300 thereabouts generating capacity. And then we have barely 4,000 at any point in time. I think we hit 5,000 megawatts only once. This is a country of 200 million people. Now, when you run the numbers and you do the analysis, which I'm sure the discos and the gencos, they have all those kinds of data, where is this power going to? Is it really going across the country? What percentage of our population have access to power in the first place? When you begin to look at that, you find that what needs to happen right now is we need to increase the infrastructure in that space, whether it is grid power or captive. There is so many different elements that can come into play, but the underlying reality is that it's going to call for investments. You don't expect investors to come in and you are telling them from the beginning that they are not going to make profit because it's a social service. That's not the way it works. And that's why we have stayed where we have stayed. The unfortunate thing is that because of how many years we have lived in this situation, there would be a period of pain that everybody will feel collectively, so that we can get the infrastructure in place, expand the electricity generation capacity in the country, make sure it is deployed across the country, and then competitive forces will begin to work and pull this down. When you have the option to buy your power from A or B, the way you can port from MTN to 9 Mobile or whoever at will, then you will see people jostling to give efficient services at the best prices. We cannot be trying to deal with 200 million people and share 4,000 megawatts amongst them and then keep telling the investors to put more money on the ground. It doesn't work that way. This is the reality.
Now, let's talk about gas, the state of gas in the country. The Minister of State for Petroleum Resources indeed declared this year as the year of gas for the nation. We saw what happened yesterday for U.S. oil, crude, falling beneath negative, falling below $1, in fact, in the negative. And I think it's still trading at that right now. What exactly, where exactly should we be going? You know, sometimes what is happening in the country will just make you laugh, because I think by now we should know what we should do. We should be doing and do it rightly. We have potentials for gas, even more than crude oil at this point. Close to, I think, 200 trillion, I think, standard cubic feet of gas. Yes. So it should be indeed a year of gas. But speak to me about the state of the gas market right now in Nigeria.
Okay, so now the challenge with the gas market in Nigeria currently is that because we have focused more over the years on associated gas, which is the gas that you get in the oil production exploration process. When things begin to happen in the oil sector, therefore, as far as pricing is concerned, there is an immediate impact, likewise, on gas. And you remember that those who are familiar with the Associated Gas Framework Agreement was a provisioning that allowed the oil companies to then net off their costs of investments in gas through or from their oil profits. And that is why we started to see a lot of gas projects coming to the fore. So there is such a high linkage, and this has been one of the issues that as the Nigerian Gas Company Association we've been talking about for years, that we have to create a landscape for gas such that people are deliberately exploring non-associated gas and commercializing it. As long as we keep this marriage with associated gas, then every time the oil sector takes a hit, we see a direct hit on the gas sector. So what is happening now, as the IOCs, both the small I and the capital I, as we call them, the indigenous and the international, are taking a hit currently, it's impacting on the capex provisions for gas projects in this year. Now, our gas industry already is one that is suffering from that same dearth of infrastructure, but there are projects that have been outlined which we're hoping that from this year will begin to get off the table so that we start to build that midstream infrastructure capacity that helps us to then do more gas projects, whether it's gas to industry or gas to power, and ultimately perhaps gas to residential and transportation sectors. So it's a very difficult time right now. Yes, the minister did declare year of gas, and we've seen some movement in that regard. Unfortunately, none of us foresaw this pandemic. It's a pandemic that is impacting cash flows. It's a pandemic impacting workflows, logistics. It is just a difficult time. That said, as a nation, honestly, there is no better time than now. The time was actually 10, 15 years ago. But no, we're back here again, facing another recession, facing severe economic dampening. And this is the best time to now come back to gas. How do we enable and incentivize the gas landscape? How do we bring those who are already players to the table to say, look, what kind of sweeteners can we put to encourage you, even in the face of all these problems, to take on some new projects to increase the in-country utilization of gas? Because it's not just about having the gas. It's what are we doing with it in-country to create value addition, to create a lot of gas-based industries that will employ our people and create export revenues from the products that are processed out of those. So it's an interesting time for Nigeria if we do the right things. Unfortunately, because of the impact on capital flows, both governments and private sector, it's also a very difficult time. And like you said, sometimes when you talk about this, it's really a bit difficult to see that positive side of it, to be bullishly optimistic. Yeah. We really just can't. And gas is certainly that future for Nigeria. But here's the problem: the future was 10 years ago. So we need to very quickly.
In terms of the future being 10 years ago, can we redraw the future right now amid the COVID-19 pandemic and with what government is doing around? The Minister of State for Petroleum Resources also said some time ago that Warri, Port Harcourt, Kaduna refineries are to achieve local production of LPG by 2023. Are you satisfied with the actions of government here and there?
So I really don't want to make this all about government. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes when we have these conversations, it begins to look like that's all it's about. This is the time for increased partnerships between the government and the private sector, because especially it is the private sector that even has the capital to make most of these things happen. So yes, the LPG space is very interesting space for us as a country because we've not done very much with that. If you look at smaller countries, even in the West African sub-region, you can see that in terms of LPG penetration, Nigeria is not doing very well at all. So it's interesting to hear what we want to do with our refineries, but I think more interesting is, can we enable private refining capacities? We're already seeing Dangote is there. We have, what's their name? I forget, right? We have another smaller refinery that was commissioned last year. And we need to see more of that happening so that we're refining in country. Now, when you look at what is happening in the oil sector, the global oil industry, part of the challenge for a country like Nigeria is that we don't have enough in-country refining capacity. And then we don't even have enough contracts outside to take our oil. So really, this is a good time for the refinery conversation to be happening. And then a good time for the LPG conversation to be happening. Is a great time for us to look at virtual technologies that can help us take gas across the country, because we really don't have the time to be building so many pipelines that take 2-3 years to deliver. Okay, so it's like I said earlier, good time for Nigeria. What I think needs to happen is we all need to come back to the table and try to prioritize the projects we're looking at before and look at what needs to come to the fore first and quickly so that we don't lose this time. My worry, however, is that if we suddenly see an uptick in pricing, though I suspect we'll be seeing sub 20, sub 30 prices for quite a while, but the concern is, will we become distracted again if we start to see an uptick? And my plea then to both the government and private sector is that we should not take our eyes off gas at this point in time. That's really what Nigeria needs. Gas can enable so many other sectors of the economy, agriculture, any sector you look at. Gas is an enabler as fuel or as feedstock. So how about we get past the rhetorics of many years and actually begin to take action because of the situation we find ourselves in?
I think that's a good place to leave this conversation. Hoping to chat with you soon, very, very soon. Thank you very much for your submissions. You've just said it all. I think this is the right time to discuss everything, because most of the things in Nigeria are abnormal. So this is the time to discuss everything. But we need that responsibility and responsiveness, as well as being honest to ourselves that things are bad, but we can make it not go worse.
That's right.
We shouldn't waste this crisis. Thank you very much for speaking to me. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, I've been Audrey Joe-Ezigbo, the President, Nigerian Gas Association, as well as the co-founder and Deputy Managing Director, Falcon Corporation Limited.